Welcome to Will's Personal Development Podcast. My name's Will, and I have a exciting guest for you today. His name is Dan Beaumont, and he is interesting, incredible social entrepreneur. He has traveled all over the country, and he currently runs a company called Podstel, which is in the hospitality industry. We'll get into that. In addition to travel, he's interested in social activities. We're going to be talking about the Camino de Santiago, which is a pilgrimage. And we're going to be talking about quitting alcohol, his daily routine of writing, and a few other cool things about his travels and his life purpose. So, Dan, do you want to, is there anything you want to add to your bio and tell the listeners about you?
First of all, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to come and speak here. I'm very grateful that you're doing this, and it's awesome that you're spreading ideas and sharing knowledge with people around the world. I think you hit the nail on the head with much of what you said there, and I'm sure we're going to get into most of the topics that you briefly touched on there as well. So, congrats for the summit.
Awesome. So we're just going to have a fun conversation here, and I want to start with Podstel because I think it's relevant. We're currently recording this during the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic. So, obviously the travel and hospitality industry has been hit. Can you tell us about, your current journey and story with Podstel and how you're handling things currently? First off, what is Podstel? Because a lot of our listeners aren't aware of who you are.
Yeah, okay. So Podstal is basically a place for travelers and locals to come together to share ideas and to connect with each other. So I set off traveling in 2012 when I just graduated from university in business management. And I was confused, to be honest, at the time, and I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And my best friend, Joe, was going off to travel to Australia. And I decided to piggyback on with him on that journey. And it led to this really beautiful experience, this spontaneous experience of just going from one place to the other. And on that journey, I stayed in a hostel for the first time in a place called Katoomba in Australia. We were traveling down the coast in our car, and it was raining like crazy this night. And we were so sick of staying in our car. So we were like, let's try a hostel. And I remember walking into the hostel and thinking immediately, wow, what a beautiful place. There's so many people here from 30, 40 different countries. And look, they've got so many stories and skills and ideas to share. And I remember looking over at the receptionist and her looking very miserable. And I was like, wait there a minute. This is meant to be like the funnest job in the world. And yet she wasn't, she looked like she didn't want to be there. And I just saw in this moment an opportunity to create something different. Because as we know, a hostel is seen as kind of like a place to socialize and drink and party. But what I saw was much more than that. I saw this great domain that brought the world together. All of these ideas, all of these passions, all of these skills, but no hostel was giving their guests the opportunity to share that knowledge and to share them passions and to share them interests. So that's when Podstal was born. So for the next 4 years of my life, I went on a journey around the world, visiting 50 countries, and basically to get an idea of what great hospitality meant. So I stayed in all kinds of hostels, maybe 300 hostels. I couch surfed crazily. I did loads of couch surfing. I stayed in Airbnbs. I stayed in hotels. And by the end of this journey and like 10 journals later, we developed the concept for Podstal. And the idea was to bring locals and travelers together in different cities of the world to share their knowledge and skills. So we went out on a journey across Europe. We actually hitchhiked across Europe to try and find the first location that Podstal would be situated in. At the time, we had a load of passion. There was me and my best friends working on this project together. We were hitchhiking on like €5 a day, staying in like staying in our tents and volunteering and stuff. But although we didn't have any money, we had all this passion, and we eventually, after hitchhiking across 13, 14 countries in Europe, we ended up in a place called Leipzig in Germany, and we fell in love with this city, and we decided that we'd try and give it a shot there. So we rented an apartment with our last bit of money, and we turned that apartment into kind of like a beta version of Podstill. So there was 2 bedrooms, and me, Sam, and Jason, the founders of Podstill, stayed in one room, and then we rented one room on Airbnb to cover the cost for the apartment. And then we'd have like 10 couch surfers staying in the living room. And we do all kinds of social activities and cook and go out with the guests, and there would be jamming sessions and all kinds. It was really fun and beautiful. And then one of our guests, it was a guy called Paulo from Brazil. He came in August 2015, at the time when Podstill was really, this little beta version flat was really booming. And he had an amazing stay. And at the end of his stay, he took me and Sam and Jason for a walk, and he said, guys, I really love what you're doing here. I want to become your investor, because I can see that you've got the passion, you've got the skill, you've done the research, but we need to take this to a next level. We need to professionalize this. We need to turn this into something beautiful. So Paulo is actually a couch surfer who stayed with us. And so he experienced Podstill firsthand. And so Paulo became our investor, and then we began looking further afield for properties around Europe. We stumbled upon a really random opportunity in Bucharest. It sounds crazy, but I'm really briefing down the story here. And we ended up traveling to Bucharest and found the first location where we would spend the next 4 years of our lives, setting up Podstill Bucharest, which is our original place, which is a cafe and a hostel at the same time. Cafe brings in the locals, hostel brings in the travelers, and then we connect them through really interesting and funky workshops, events, all kinds of like guest-led performances and these kind of things. And then on the back of that success, we opened our second one in the city. And that's leading up to 2019, 2020, where we're at now. And we're here, and we have Podstill Bucharest, Podstill Umbrella, and we host 10,000 guests a year from 100 countries. So we've, I've really shortened the story there, because, of course, I want to get into the depth of the lessons and all of the learnings and stuff. But that's a brief summary of Podstill. And going back to your question at the start, COVID, it's really brought us to an interesting place where we've seen overnight our occupancy go from 90% to basically less than 5%, basically an existential crisis for both of our businesses. And it doesn't look like travel is going to be coming back anytime soon. So we've really been hard hit by this. And at first I was quite anxious and worried and scared, but over time I've come to accept in a very stoic manner that we can lose everything here. We can lose the concept of Podstill, and life's still going to be okay. We'll move on, because it's not Podstill that's important. It's what we've created and learned and experienced over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years that's important, and that stays with us regardless of whether Podstill doesn't survive this. Although we've been very strategic, and we've managed to solve things internally, so Podstill can survive the crisis for at least a year, financially speaking, because we were clever with our finances. But we can't control the external world. We can't control what governments are going to do, what policy is going to come in place. And this is, again, in line with, stoicism. We're doing what we can do, but we don't know. There's a whole pool of unknowns that are beyond our control. And that's where we're at now. But I'm in complete acceptance of the worst case scenario, and that is Podstill not having to close down because the market doesn't come back. That's the worst case scenario. and I've meditated on that. I've contemplated that, and it's fine. So yeah, that's the Podstill story in brief, and where we're at now in like 5 minutes. Yeah.
And that's incredible that you've been able to, you know, go through that journey and to be able to come to that stoic conclusion. Um, and I think it's important. I think many people are unable to calm their anxieties, and I think travel was like a key part of your story throughout that, and it's kind of taught you that you know many people haven't been in those situations where they're living on a little amount of money, so they have that fear of the unknown. But when you've experienced that, you're okay with the worst case situation.
Yeah.
And I also read somewhere on your blog, which is, by the way, very well designed and well written. Um, you mentioned how you believe that travel is one of the best ways to enrich your life and grow and learn. And
Yeah.
we have a lot of young listeners here. Some of them have just graduated school. Some of them have been out for a few years, and um, they probably have not traveled at all. They're, concerned about the costs and so forth. But I personally think we all want to travel, and whether it's in a year or 2 years or 5 years, uh, young people, older people will resume traveling at some point,
Yeah.
because it's such an interesting, fascinating time in our lives where, as you mentioned, with the hostels, never before in history can you get 40, 50 countries in one location.
Yeah.
I've just started my travel journey, and I've only been to a few hostels, but that's one of the things that really stood out to me, whether it happened in a hostel or not. When I saw all these different people from so many different countries in one place, that was not possible, a couple hundred years ago.
Yeah.
So I guess my next question for you is, in terms of like lessons or insights you would want to provide this young audience of people who don't really know the why travel is so beautiful, other than it's fun. What would you tell them to get them on the journey?
So my perspective on travel is actually, it's interesting actually, because when I was 17 years old, I was very insular in the sense that I was against travel. I wanted to stay. I wanted to stay in the UK where I grew up. I wanted a comfortable life. I wanted certainty. I wanted job. I wanted security. All of these kind of things. But it wasn't until I went to university and I went off one summer and did an interrailing trip on the train around Europe that I first saw how special travel can be. And it was like, wait there a second. This is probably one of the best playgrounds to learn about yourself and the world around you. Because what it is about home is that after 25 years or 20 years of living in the same place, everything is so familiar. And that most of most of our days are spent walking around in kind of like an autopilot mode, where we're merely like placing out the motions that have been memorized by the brain. And what happens when you're traveling is that everything is unique and new. So it's sensory overload every single day. And it's this breadth and depth of new sensory information that expands the brain. And not only does it expand the brain, but it also gives you new perspectives of the world from people that you didn't grow up with. Because, like in England, for example, in my small town that I grew up in Kendal, in the Lake District for 20 years of my life, most people think the same way, and most people are similar. Like in my school, there was 1,300 people, and we were mostly all from the same town, and we all liked football and stuff like this. But when I went and traveled, I noticed that there was so much more to life than football, and that there was so much more to life than all of this other stuff and all of these other things that I've learned. And yeah, so travel for me was eye-opening in the sense that I got to meet some very special people that I wouldn't have met if I would have stuck in the same place. People who have become mentors for life. people who are a lot older than me, a lot different to me, and I just can't imagine how I would have met them had I have stayed in a comfortable domain in the UK, in kind of like my small town in the north of England. So that's why it's been very special in a sense, that it's this idea of novel experiences. And I advise people, there's this cultural narrative that says that we have to sort our lives out as soon as possible, i.e., as soon as we finish university, it's expected of us to get into a job and start building a family in your 20s. But I would argue that that narrative isn't the best course of action. I see 20s and possibly even early 30s up until you're about 35 as these exploration years, and years where you're still trying to work out your identity. You're still going through the individuation process. You're still kind of like trying to work out what you like doing, what you don't like doing. And the worst possible thing that you could do is to commit to something so quickly in your life, based on the certainty that you know that it's good for you, because you haven't even explored. So how do you know what's good for you? And it's this idea that, like, by exploring, I got to know myself more, and I got to know what my fears were, what my dreams were, what my ambitions were, what my passions actually were. And I've 8 years on, no regrets at all. Like, I've learned so much about myself, and I've learned that there's still so much more to learn about myself, and travel will always be an integral part of my life. But I would advise people who are listening to use your 20s, to try as much as possible to use your 20s as years to explore, because the more that you can explore and the more that you can try diverse experiences, the more likely it is that you're going to find what you're really destined to do, rather than put yourself into something that you don't want to do by not exploring. Because I've heard this story so many times, when people jump into stuff without really thinking it through and without really exploring other stuff, and then to become committed to the point where they can't get out. And it's really difficult because they have a mortgage to pay, or they have a car to pay for, or all of these liabilities. But consider yourself, when you come out of school or university, at least in the UK, you don't have many burdens on your back. And this is the perfect time to travel and get out there and see the world as well. Because, yeah, it broadens you.
That was really well said. Hopefully that helps everyone out there. I know it helped me. What places have you traveled? Like, which routes have you gone to? I know you've gone to so many countries, but I'm trying to draw inspiration for everyone else out there listening, who on maybe different ways of traveling, because I know you can go through many countries in one trip.
Yeah. There's many different forms of traveling, and like I have friends who just enjoy weekend city trips, but for me, I've developed my philosophy over time, and I travel for people. So I don't travel by destination anymore. I travel for the chance of meeting really special people, because I know from my own experiences that that's when the most magical things have happened in my life. And the way that I make that more likely to happen, that I'm going to meet some magical people, is through a combination of hitchhiking, which is basically putting your thumb out on the side of the road and hoping that some crazy guy is going to stop and pick you up and take you to wherever you want to go. And couch surfing as well, which I mentioned briefly about it earlier. Couch surfing, it's this online platform, travelers and locals, and basically you send out a request. You have a profile, and you can write about your interests and your passions and all of this kind of stuff, and you can send out requests to hosts, asking if you can stay on their couch for the night. And in return, it's kind of like a cultural exchange, in that you share ideas, maybe you cook together, and it's this beautiful platform, and I met so many special people through that. And a lot of Podstall's philosophy actually came from many of my couch surfing experiences. But in general, I like to travel slow. I used to be the kind of guy who wanted to tick off all the destinations and who wanted to make sure that I saw all the landmarks, but I ditched that like 3-4 years ago. Now for me, it's about relationships. It's about who am I gonna meet, and who and what can we share and learn together.
Why did you ditch the destination checking method?
It just didn't cut it for me. It really it felt it never left me, like taking pictures of destinations
Wasn't
and
fulfilling.
and like the next church and stuff. After a while, after visiting 50 countries, and it just got boring. I much rather hear a beautiful human story than take a picture of a church. And I'm a big nature lover as well. So I prefer being in rural areas, in small towns, and just being around people. Most of my most beautiful memories in life are with people, and that's just my way of traveling. And I would advise everybody to work out what works for them. But you can start off in a very safe way by, there's companies out there. I can't remember the name, but like gap year companies that specialize in taking organized groups for 6 months across like South America, and they sort all of your accommodation and logistics for you, and you just get to experience. Of course, it comes at a cost, but this could be a nice way of stepping into it if you're not ready to start hitchhiking and to start planning travel by yourself.
So you mentioned interesting, magical people. What would you define as criteria for that? Like, what do you look for when you're looking for someone who fulfills that ideal?
Yeah. The most special people that I've ever met in my life have carried this sense of humility. I think that's probably the most, and vulnerability. They were willing to, they didn't appear that they had all of the answers. They didn't suggest that for one moment. And they were incredibly open-minded and willing to learn. And they also had this, like, they were really motivated and had done well in, I'm just talking about the people who have become mentors who I've met traveling. They'd done really well professionally, but also carried this kind of like really fun vibe to them as well. Like this oscillation between serious and can like turn it on for work, but then at the same time knows the importance of having a good time and connecting with other people. And I really like this idea of contrasts, that we're not always just like one or the other. You're not just serious, you're fun as well. You're not just structured, you're chaotic as well. And it's about oscillating between this balance always. And the situation that you find yourself in may need a different kind of like balance of them, of them contrasts. And the humility is the most important thing. Like I was able to speak to them truthfully and feel like I was connecting with the person. Oftentimes we built rapport with these kind of people very quickly, and they would often share like the deepest struggles of their lives, as well as their dreams and ambitions and magical memories and stories. And I was like, that's someone I want to stay good friends with for the rest of my life. And of thousands and thousands of people that I've met in my travels, there's probably 10 people who I've like really been like, I want to develop a long-term life relationship with this person. 10 people from thousands.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And what you mentioned about how they switched off from serious to having fun. That's something that go ahead.
It's just this versatility to life. Like they just this willingness to adapt to the situation and not to box themselves into a particular paradigm or way of being. Because I think we're not just who we think we are as humans. We're a lot more than that, and we can be everything. And and some people bring the best out of us, and these people certainly brought the best out of me, and we jammed well together. So it was inevitable that our relationship was going to continue. And I think you'll know as well in your own life when you meet someone and you're like, wow, there's a connection here, and you can't explain it with words. It's one of them.
It's natural.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think Ray Dalio with his new book Principles has definitely mentioned open-mindedness a lot. And before that, I don't think anyone really mentioned that term. So it's definitely something I'm keeping my eye on. In terms of travel, we'll get into some of the other stuff here. But the last, I have a few final questions on travel. I think people are gonna bring up, well, is it safe to hitchhike? Can you touch briefly on safety?
Yeah. So theoretically, hitchhiking is safer than getting on the bus, for example, or going on the underground or something like this. You're more likely, just through sheer probability, to get hurt or injured by somebody on underground. But practically, this doesn't always. It's not always the case, because there's people who who have had bad hitchhiking experiences. But then those stories are very few and far between, and they get escalated. So when they happen, it's crazy news, and it gets blown up in from all kinds of proportions. And but in my experience, and I've hitchhiked maybe over 1,000 times in 30 countries, I've never had an experience that was out of control in terms of where I felt unsafe. There was actually drivers who stopped, and I felt like an intuitive bad vibe, and I just said to them, look, I'm just going to go and get some food from the service station. It's okay. But it was intuition that told me not to get in. And sometimes there was times when the driver was drinking, or sometimes sketchy, minimally sketchy situations, but never anything drastically crazy. So I would say it is safe in general, but obviously anything can go wrong. So I would not, if you're going to do it for the first time, and especially if you're a female, to do it together with somebody else, preferably a male as well if you're a female. And a good little fun strategy is, if you're a female hitchhiker, it's very easy to get picked up. So what the male should do is hide in a bush and then jump out when the car stops. And the guy who stops, like, oh my God, I was expecting just a ride with the girl, and now there's a guy as well, and he can't say no at this point because he's stopped. So I would I know lots of girl hitchhikers who have traveled successfully hitchhiking with no problems. But I've also, I don't want to play down that there is a risk as well. Like, there's a risk with anything, but you can definitely minimize that risk by traveling with a few people, and perhaps sharing your location with family and friends, and letting them know exactly where you're at, and using your intuition as well. And if something seems off, just ask politely to get out. Or if it seems off before you get in the car, then just don't get in the car at all. Don't let people pressure you into anything that you don't want to do or feel intuitively bad for doing.
And one thing I wanted to mention was, it's definitely worth mentioning because I found it so fascinating. You got a lot of press for this a few years ago. I believe you used Tinder and maybe other dating apps to travel around the United States. Give us some Tinder tips here. Was because you were very successful with traveling across the whole states from what I read in the article, and
Yeah, that kind of the news outlets, of course, kind of like skewed the story. It was more of a social experiment about human connection and kindness. So it wasn't about, you know, sleeping with girls and all of this kind of stuff that they suggested. The truth is that I used a collection. I used couch surfing. I used Craigslist, which you guys obviously know about in America, and Tinder to get across the US, and I managed to do it in 3 months. And I basically it wasn't just me going on Tinder and saying kind of like, can you give me a ride to the next destination? I would do something in return for the person who picked me up. And we might go on a hike together, we might cook together, we might do something, but it was a really beautiful chance to exchange and share something. And I met some magical people through it. And I have all kinds of crazy stories, which I mean, we can't go into now because we don't have time. But through Craigslist, I met this crazy guy called Paul who took us to his marijuana farms along the way, and he was crazy, and we drove with him for 3 days. It was me and a friend doing it, and we ended up driving with this like 50-year-old guy who was kind of like a criminal in Las Vegas, who had all kinds of problems, but he'd turned his life around, and he was now a priest. And he had all kinds of crazy stories, and just fascinating people. And then, of course, as well, I met lots of people through Tinder, and um, most of I'm not going to deny that like some of those relationships did manifest into something more. In general, that was only a minute number of the actual the actual number. I think I must have hitchhiked with 180 people in total across Canada and America. So yeah, there was a lot of people. Yeah, it was a very special journey.
Yeah, I find that you're very intent on the process of contributing value, and you're aware that value doesn't have to always come in the form of work or money,
Yeah.
but you know, sharing experiences, sharing stories, sharing your life, or even just cooking together. And
Mm.
that's, I don't think everyone understands that, and that's, I think that's very valuable in case any listeners are trying to improve their networking or just build better relationships. Like value can be exchanged in many different ways.
For sure, for sure. It's the most important principle that you build meaningful relationships by more than just, you know, monetarily doing stuff for people and all of these kind of things. There's so much more that you can do. You can connect someone with somebody else if you feel like there's going to be a good connection. But it has to come from this genuine place. That was my thing all the time. I never did this like strategically or anything. It came from my heart because I'm a very kind person and I like to give. And even still now, when I'm walking around and going to the hostel, I like to contribute. I like if somebody needs something, I have an intuitive eye for seeing that, and I'll give it to them before they even ask for it, and sometimes before they even know that they need it. Because I'm always trying to read between the lines of what people want and need. Because sometimes people are anxious or scared or fearful to share what they want or need. And I found that many times we've simply been like the middleman at Podstill, just connecting people, where you can see a really beautiful connection, but neither party has the courage to go up and speak to each other. And that's when we would come in, because we've been doing this for a long time. So like Jenny, meet Roger, and like he also likes guitar. Maybe you guys can have a little jam together tonight at the open mic night. Maybe write a little song together for tonight, and then it just like it breaks the ice for them. But most of this stuff is kind of it's the small things. It's interesting because we normally focus on, you know, monetary things or gifts and materials and possessions. But I've realized more and more that I've gone through my life that it's actually the smaller things that are more important to people. The experiences, memories, little kind, random acts of kindness, gratitude, compassion, kindness. All of this stuff is far more important. And I've gone away more and more as I've lived my life from this idea of materials and consumption, and having been majorly focused on that in my teenage years, it was all about who had the best, you know, trainers and whether you had the latest technology and all of this kind of stuff. But now I know that it's when you're on your deathbed at the end of your life, you're not going to think about your cars and your money and your materials and stuff, because that's all transient. All that's going to be important to you is is your experiences and your memories and what you've learned, and whether you've lived a joyful and happy life and fulfilling life, and struggles as well. These are the kind of things that I know for sure, because I've spoken to people who have dealt with people who are in the last days of death. And there's an interesting book written on this by Annie Ware, the five regrets of the dying or something. 5 regrets of the dying.
Top 5 regrets of the dying.
And the conclusion there is that they wish that it basically all comes back to experiences and loved ones and relationships that were the most important thing to them. And in many cases, many of these people had regrets that they focused on the wrong thing for most of their life. The wrong things like money, status, being liked, not living true to their values and doing things just to please other people. So I don't want to live like that personally. And I've seen with my own 2 eyes that it's the small things in life that matter the most.
That's very well said. I definitely believe that too. Yeah, I actually just finished a book by Sonja Liambersky. She's a positive psychology researcher, and she mentions how, you know, there's a drop-in correlation between happiness and money after a certain point.
Yeah, I've heard of this.
Then there's like three core tenets to happiness: autonomy, community, and competency.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So that's definitely some food for thought for our listeners there.
I just did a double check on the book as well. It's Bonnie Ware, the top 5 regrets of the dying. It's really interesting.
Yeah, definitely worth a read there. In terms of the connection thing, I just wanted to emphasize that you know, simply introducing 2 people could be a way of contributing value as well. I found that's a great networking or just communication thing we can do there. In terms of Tinder, like was it just the fact that you were so interesting and you're just going places and doing something new that really kind of attracted women to message you and talk to you? I just want to touch on that one more time, because I think we've got a lot of young guys out there.
Yeah, it goes back to this idea that of novelty, that most people have very, you know, like large part of life is routine and boring. And it was something different that what I was doing, and it was a challenge, and people wanted to be involved in that challenge. So it was no surprise as well. And I'm British, and you know, Americans like British as well. And but I really think this is one of the 6 human needs. I don't know if you're familiar with the 6 human needs.
I'm not.
So I'll just briefly say what they are, but the first one is certainty, safety, security, and all of that kind of stuff. The second one is uncertainty, novelty, new experiences, adventure, spontaneity. Third one is significance. We want to feel significant as humans. Fourth one is love and connection. Fifth one is growth. We want to learn and grow and become better. And then the final one is contribution. So what we're really talking about here is number two, that people need uncertainty in their life as well. Once they've got their structure sorted, they want to have adventures, and they want to, and I think maybe I was offering a chance for an adventure, a brief, fleeting adventure, like a climb up a mountain, and then they could go home to their certainty again. And I understand this, and I think that's why people were appealed to it, appealed to what I was doing. And because it was novel as well, and hitchhiking something, it's rare, it's not something that everybody does. It's risky a little bit as well. So I think people are driven towards kind of like a sense of danger to a certain degree as well. Just the curiosity of the brain that drives you into wanting to, like, what would that be like? But yeah, this inherent human need of uncertainty and needing novelty in our lives is probably what drove most of the people to want to help. And then contribution, that naturally goes into the sixth human need there, that we naturally, from the core of our hearts, want to help people. We really do. It's innate. It's in us, and I've seen it in many people. And that's basically them hitting two of them six human needs right there, that ultimately make that person feel worthy, loved, significant, appreciated, understood, and valued. So yeah.
That's fascinating how it all ends up coming back down to humans and what they want and what matters to them.
Yeah.
El Camino de Santiago. Can you tell us about this journey you're going on, what it is, what this route means to you? And
Yeah.
I'm very fascinated as to why you're doing this. What's the spiritual or personal journey you're going on here?
Yeah, so it's very simple. Like in 2016, I was struggling with anxiety and depression, and after trying so many different things like cod liver oil tablets and trying to change my situation, I just wasn't getting anywhere. And then a friend mentioned to me, Dan, have you ever thought about going on a long walk? And I pondered on it, and something clicked in my brain. I thought back to my childhood, and I thought back to what I was doing as a 6-year-old kid. And I spent most of my childhood being adventurous in nature, walking, running, doing sports. I was out all the time playing. Playing was the most important thing to me as a kid, and probably to most of you and the people listening as well. So it made sense. And then so I was in Europe at the time, and I researched possible pilgrimages, and this Camino de Santiago came up. And what it is, it's historically a religious pilgrimage, the Way of St. James, where people would walk to Santiago, which is on the northwest of Spain, to pay penance for bad stuff that they'd done. But in the 1990s, Paulo Coelho, who wrote The Alchemist, walked the Camino de Santiago. And that's what actually inspired his book, The Alchemist. Coincidentally, the lead character in The Alchemist is Santiago. Makes sense. And after Paulo Coelho walked the Camino, it kind of became a more popular route for spiritual reasons as well. And now it's kind of more dominated by spiritual reasons rather than religious reasons, in that people are walking, to find out what's next in life. Maybe they've just quit a job, or maybe they're just going through a divorce. But basically, walking the Camino is a good chance to consider changing. And so what I did, from literally 1 week to the next, I booked a ticket to Spain in 2016. I headed to the start of the trail of the Camino Francis. There's actually 55 trails. The Camino Francis is the most popular one. And I headed to this town called Saint Jean Pied de Port, And for the next 30 days, all I did was walk 30 to 50 kilometers a day. And it changed everything. It really brought me back to this idea of what it felt like being a child again. Nature, walking, writing, and the simplicity of just waking up, walking, eating, going to sleep, and then doing the same again was just utterly beautiful. I was away from all of the noise of society and all of this, you know, all of this fogginess. And I could see very clearly that there wasn't anything to be anxious or depressed about by the end of the journey. And it was a very powerful moment for me in this month of walking in 2016. So much so that I made it an annual thing. And for the last 4 years, I've walked a different 1,000-kilometer route every single year. And now I've turned this into what I call my clarity month. And it's a chance to just separate myself from the business and from Podstill, and just to go off for a month, just get rid of technology, get rid of everything in the business, no messages, all of that kind of stuff, and just be by myself and write, read, introspect, be in nature and walk. That's it. And yeah, like I said, I've walked a Camino for the last 4 years, and each Camino has yielded a different lesson, each powerful and life-changing in many degrees. And I've met some of the most beautiful people and heard some of the most fascinating stories. Like, there was a guy who was walking on crutches. He only had one leg, and he was walking 10 kilometers a day, and he made it to Santiago after 3 months. There was another woman from America who was carrying the ashes of her husband who had died from a rare eye cancer, and his final request was, please, can you carry my ashes on this Camino and drop them in the Atlantic Ocean? And I walked with her, and I was there on the last day when she got to the Atlantic Ocean, and drove back with her to Santiago just after she'd dropped off this massive, amount of life in a box that she'd been carrying for 30 days. And she'd never done anything like this in her life. She'd never walked more than like 5-10 kilometers. And there she was walking 30 kilometers a day by the end of it, with all kinds of injuries and falling over and hurting herself and crying and all of this. But she got up and she kept on going and going and going, and because she was committed to living up to what her husband wanted as a final request. So I met so many, like, that's just 2 stories of, magical people. But in short, the Camino is life-changing. And but now I'm taking it into my own hands. I'm doing my own adventures. And this year I'm going to be taking this bicycle 5,000 kilometers to the top of the UK, from Bucharest to the UK as a journey home, because I'm going to be leaving Romania eventually, and I want to close this chapter with a bike ride home. I think it's fitting for this chapter of my life.
That's awesome. It seems like these experiences are definitely very enriching, cleansing. It's a chance to uncharge, decharge, and just kind of reflect. I feel like even if I don't do the same thing, I can learn from that and find similar avenues for therapeutic and spiritual reflection, even if it's not through a bike. Maybe it's a hike or some other activity. That's awesome.
Everybody has their own ways, and I don't encourage people to just like go and walk the Camino. I encourage people to find out what their way is of exploration. That's it. And maybe it's writing for you, maybe it's horse riding for somebody else, but we all have these intrinsic things in us, and through life and societal noise, they get drowned out. But what I would recommend to people is look back into your childhood. What were you doing at 6 years old? What were you doing before you were taught anything about society? What were you doing naturally? How did you used to play? all of these kind of questions are crucially important, because I think most of the magic and most of our passions and interests and are found in these intersections in childhood, in these things that we were naturally inclined to do as a kid. And for me, those things just happen to be writing, sports, and nature. That's it. It's really simple. And the Camino is kind of like a combination of all of those things. Um, and an adventure was huge in my childhood. And I even today I just went on a micro adventure, 100-kilometer cycle, and I wrote a little 500-word passage about it as well afterwards. And it's just what I was doing as a kid, just in a more adult-like way. So I would encourage people to look back into their childhood if they can. Look through photos, speak to your parent if you don't have any recollection in your own brain, and try to find and piece together the patterns of childhood, and because most of the magic's there.
Incredible. Last thing I want to talk about is alcohol. My personal experience, I've been blessed enough to have grown up in situations where there was never too much pressure if I mentioned I didn't want to drink or not drink as much.
Yeah.
I've still been definitely very averse to drinking too much, just because of the implied costs there. But you've been on a 5-year journey without alcohol. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I guess I should start with the premise that my dad struggles with alcohol, and he has for most of his life. Since he was 18, he's now 55, so plenty of years there, nearly, coming up 40 years or whatever of struggling with alcohol. And that started a very sticky relationship at the start of my life, that my mum and dad split up because of alcohol. And my dad wasn't there when I was growing up, so there was a lot of anger and resentment towards him, and also it's been on both sides of my family as well. Like, my grandparents on my mum's side struggled with alcohol. Their past generations, their dad struggled with alcohol. So it's this kind of like generational thing that was just getting passed on and passed on and passed on. And there I was at 12 years old. I tried my first beer for the first time, and I was with friends, and it gave a really good feeling of camaraderie and socializing, and I felt connected with my friends when I drank for the first time. But I remember not liking the taste of it, and that's very important in this story. But I basically went throughout my teenage years with a very unhealthy relationship to alcohol. I wouldn't say I was addicted to alcohol, because I never liked the taste of alcohol. However, I was a binge drinker, which I would drink orange juice and Coke and normal stuff on the weekdays, and then it would get to the weekend and I'd just go all out and I'd drink like crazy and with no limits at all. And it would inevitably end in either me being really happy and loving and soppy, or me being very violent and angry. And I was often in fights, and I was angry because of my father, and I took that out on the world. And I was in all kinds of violent fights when I was younger, trying to prove myself and trying to find out who I was in hindsight, now that I know. And that got me into trouble. I had my nose broken 3 times and all kinds of misery from this. And I had to have rhinoplasty surgery on my nose. And it wasn't until I was 21 and moving away from my hometown and going to university and being around different people with a different mindset that I gradually began to see that alcohol was not something that would serve my life. I have no doubt at all that if I didn't go to university and stayed in my hometown, that I would still be drinking today, just like some of my friends are. Nothing bad on that, but for me, I couldn't control it. So when I was traveling, I met a really inspiring guy who didn't drink alcohol. and he planted the seed, but it wasn't until 6 months later, where I was nursing a really terrible hangover in Timișoara in Romania, we were hitchhiking through, when I decided, after saying for years and years, I'm going to quit, because it was something I said every weekend, I just decided from one moment to the next that I was going to quit. But this time it felt different. And I can't really explain that. There's no wisdom behind this. It was just a decision. That's the simple way of putting it. I just quit from one day to the next. There was a bet with my friend, maybe that had something to play in this, but I just never drank again. And it's been 5 years since that day. That was in 2015 in April, and my life has changed significantly. And I now have a very healthy relationship towards alcohol, in that I've not touched drink in 5 years at all. But I don't have this anger and resentment towards it, and I don't see it as a lethal substance anymore. I see it as something that it's just a substance, and it's about the person who uses that substance that dictates where it takes them. So alcohol is neither good or bad. And many people say to me, but Dan, would you consider drinking again? And I have a very simple answer to this, and my answer is no. Although I can't be certain about that answer, because life is very, unpredictable. It's almost like me saying, I don't like aubergine. Like I don't choose to eat aubergine because I prefer tomatoes. And it's the same with alcohol. Like, I don't like the taste of it, so why would I drink it? And now that I can socialize and have a good time without it, there's no reason for me to drink anymore, because I realized in hindsight that the reason I drank in the first place was to fit in and to be accepted and to be able to be social. So that meant that I could only ever be social and fun when I was drinking. So when I wasn't drinking, which was 80% of the time, I was this miserable wreck. And then when I quit, I had to face all of that. I had to face the misery. I had to face the struggles. I had to face the inner demons of myself, which I've come to accept a bit more. I had to face all of the horrible stuff that I've been kind of like repressing through alcohol, because that's what I was using it for. I was using it to get away from the harsh realities of the world for a brief moment, and to be able to socialize with my friends, because it gives you it inhibits the nervous system, and it gives you a false sense of confidence, and kind of like an edge to a degree. And what I had to do by quitting was learn how to get that edge without alcohol. And I've been working on that a lot, to the point where I'm totally comfortable with my relationship with alcohol. And in fact, I'm very proud now that I managed to do this. And I use this 5-year achievement, I translate it into other areas of my life. So if I want to achieve something like climb this crazy mountain or something, I always come back to this reference point of, wait there a minute, Dan, you managed to quit alcohol. You managed to cut this out of your generation, like at least my generation. And so this mountain is easily possible. And I use this like as kind of like substitution for everything that I do, like starting Podstill and all of this kind of stuff, because I realize it's something to be proud of. But at first I wasn't proud of it. I was really scared about what people would think. I felt when I went into a club, when I just quit, I was like, are people judging me? Are they thinking, am I ruining their night? All of these kind of questions came in my mind. And I realized that upon reflection, 5 years on, that's just all thoughts that I'm making myself. And the truth is that I've done a very noble thing for myself. And but I couldn't see that at first. For a good year or two, it was really difficult. And then first 2 months of building the new habit were like hell. Like, And I think that's why many people struggle with building really sustainable habits, because it's only the first bit that's hard. It takes 2 to 3 months to solidify a habit, and it requires, because you're changing a behavior, it requires a lot of activation energy and a lot of mental effort in them first 2 3 months. And it's no surprise why 80% of people give up in them first 2 to 3 months. But it's a long game, and if you are trying to change an element of your personality, then if you can get through them first 2 to 3 months, you're well on the track to doing something great for yourself. So when I hear people wanting to change an aspect of their personality or make a new habit, I say to them, like, don't go in with this like huge idea of like quitting in one day, or like exercise is a good example. Like if you want to start running, don't go in with this idea of like running 20K tomorrow as fast as you can. Start really, really, really small. Just run around the block and do that for a week, because you'll maintain enthusiasm, and it doesn't take that much energy to do. It's much more difficult to convince your brain to get out of bed to do a 20-kilometer run than it is to just go around the block. And make it fun as well. Make it a challenge, make it interesting, make it fun, and give yourself small rewards all the time. And this is what I did. And I just took myself out of the situations as well that would foster drinking with people. So for a month or two, I mostly didn't go to nightclubs and bars, and that helped as well. And I changed my friends. I got rid of all of my drinking friends, and that's not great in many ways. Like I have some great memories with them people, but life goes on and life changes, and my priorities have changed, and I've become much healthier. And the final thing I'll say on this, the last thing and the most important thing, in life, there's an opportunity cost for everything that we do. So for every minute of the day that I spend drinking alcohol, I lose out on the opportunity of doing something else. And that could be reading, that could be writing, that could be looking after my health, that could be, developing a deep relationship with someone. And when I took away alcohol, it left all of this beautiful white space to fill it with running and writing and cooking and actually having deep and meaningful conversations with people, because I remember barely any of the conversations when I was drunk. So actually, by getting rid of alcohol, opened up an opportunity for many more beautiful things, and it's a no-brainer now. I keep on saying I'm 80%, 90% certain I'll never drink again, because I know that it's just not for me. But there is an element of life that's uncertain. But I would have to go through many other things before I go to alcohol. I'd have to go through all the chocolate in the world. I'd have to go through. There's a lot of sugar to eat first. I have
Definitely.
many different coping mechanisms to deal with pain now and trauma that are not alcohol. I think I've settled this part of my life, and my dad hasn't, unfortunately. And I think the benefit of his parenting, which I now see, which might sound quite strange to some people, is that actually, although my dad wasn't there and he wasn't a big part of my life, he was actually probably the most powerful and best parent I could have asked for, because he showed me what I didn't want to become. And I saw very clearly what alcohol did to him. And maybe that's more important and more effective than him being a good parent. Because maybe if he was a good parent, I might not have been as extreme in the way that I dealt with alcohol at such a young age. And then maybe I might have, taken a stagnant relationship with it all throughout my life, which actually over the span of 80 years could have been far more detrimental than what, 8 years of intense binge drinking did. I managed to quit when I was 24, and I see this as over now.
Wow, thanks so much for sharing. Lots of fascinating thoughts and ideas to go on there with habit formation, with alcohol, with parenting. We even touched on, once again, human motives of feeling as if we belonged, feeling liked. And if it's any help, I do definitely believe that one can fit in, even if they don't drink. I don't drink, and yeah, that's something that I'm happy about and I'm proud of. So many good things to just think about and ponder for our listeners here. Is there anything else you want to tell the listeners before we sign off?
Yeah, like the final thing that I would say from this, like my conclusion would be, is that there's nothing more beautiful than you being you. And touching on your point there, that we do a lot of things to fit in life. We try to impress other people. We buy the same things. We listen to the same music, um, and we in some cases become sheep and follow the herd. But that takes away. That's doing a really big disservice to yourself. You are utterly unique in who you are, and I would implore and encourage people to look into that and to find what's uniquely beautiful about you, because there's nothing more sexy than someone being themselves. And I realize this now, and I've lived a lot of my life trying to please other people, and all it leads to is are the wrong kinds of emotions. And the most beautiful people I've ever met in my life were not afraid to be themselves. And that's actually, interestingly, in society, the people we look up to, the you know, like the people who do heroic things, the people who start businesses, who we idolize, these gurus or whatever, if you want to label them like that, we idolize them not because they're the same as us and they're following everyone else, but because they're being completely different and they're being themselves. In many ways, they're expressing who they are, and that's why we love them. So it would be beautiful to see more people being themselves rather than following herds, societal norms, stigmas, all of these kind of things that just basically take you away from yourself. So again, go back into your childhood, look at who you were as a 6-year-old, 5-year-old kid, ask your parents, look back through photos, and work out what is unique about you, and then try to bring that into your adult life existence and build that around the structure that you've created for yourself in adulthood. Build that around your job. Build that. Maybe somehow then passions and interests intersect into some kind of meaningful work for you that can pay you money as well. But yeah, be you. More being you would be beautiful.
So you would choose to be yourself, even if that meant less or few friends or no friends.
You get you the right friends. It certainly has in my case. By fitting in, you kind of water down who you are. So if you're never really being authentic, are you really building a proper relationship with those people?
Mm.
That's the thought that comes to mind. If you're never actually able to express your true being to someone, then I would be criticizing or thinking about what that actual relationship is all about. And this comes back to the ideas that I was talking about, the people who I build relationships around, important characteristics like vulnerability, humility, open-mindedness. These are all related to being yourself. If somebody can say that they're struggling and that they're having a hard time and stuff, they're being themselves. They're being human. We're all like incredibly flawed at the end of the day, and I think there's a lot of strength in sharing that with other humans, rather than putting on a front that everything's okay all the time. It's not okay. We life is inherently a series of inevitable struggles, and I don't mean to say that in a negative way. It's not negative at all. I mean this in the most positive way at all. That if you can accept that life is inherently that life inherently has an element of struggle with it, and you're fine with that, and you actually embrace that, you can live a very meaningful and deep and fulfilling life.
Well said. Thank you so much for your time, Dan. I'll leave the show notes, links to your blog and so forth. Be sure to leave a review and subscribe to the podcast. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you as well.